Okay, so in this tutorial, we're going to go ahead and cover how do we create a 2D floor plan from this 3D model. In the previous tutorial, we covered creating a elevation drawing, right? But that was pretty much just taking the view, taking one of our views and creating a make 2D from this. A floor plan is a little bit more complicated because we actually have to cut through the building. Now, fortunately, in Rhino, we have a command called clipping plane, and a clipping plane will allow us to slice through. It essentially will create a slice that we can then move up and down, and it'll slice the building based on the location of that clipping plane. And so it makes creating these two-dimensional drawings, like a floor plan or a section, very, very easy. Now, if you're not familiar, the term floor plan refers to a horizontal cut that cuts through a building. Okay? Vertical cuts are known as sections, but horizontal ones are known as floor plans. And these horizontal cuts are typically taken 4 feet above finished floor. Okay, finished floor just refers to the top layer, the top kind of top material that we step on. Okay, a floor is made up of a bunch of different things. There's a lot of different kind of components, structural components that go into a floor, and the very top layer of that floor, um, what we all walk on, that is known as finished floor. So a floor plan goes 4 feet above the finished floor. Now that's the typical height. If a floor plan does not specify a height, then it just assumes that it's at 4 feet. But if a floor plan does specify a height, let's say you wanted a floor plan that is shown at 5 feet or at 3 feet or at 6 feet, whatever height you want, then you would just specify that in the drawings on the bottom right corner where you would name, let's say first floor plan at 5 feet, right? Um, but most floor plans are taking 4 feet above the finished floor. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get into creating this floor plan. The first thing I'm going to do is actually create a layer that's called clipping plane. Because in order to create drawings, we need clipping planes, and each drawing requires its own clipping plane. So if we want a first floor clipping plane, a second floor clipping plane, depending on how many sections we want, each of those sections is going to have its own clipping plane. So it's best to have just one layer called clipping plane. And in that layer, we'll go ahead and just call it we'll go ahead and add all of these additional layers, a lot of these additional clipping planes within that clipping plane layer. So we'll create one that says clipping plane first floor. Let's create another one that is CP second floor. And I'm just going to click and drag and put these inside just like that. Okay. All right. In order to create a clipping plane, we're going to just type in the command clipping plane. And it's going to ask me to create a rectangle. Now, this rectangle is drawn along a surface. How do I say this? It's drawn along a surface that is parallel to the clipping plane we want to create. In other words, if I want to create a horizontal clipping plane, then I need to draw a rectangle that is horizontal. If I want a vertical clipping plane, then I need to draw a clipping plane, a rectangle that is along a vertical surface. Okay. So because I want a floor plan, that's a horizontal clipping plane. So I'm going to go over here along this kind of patio space. And I'm just going to create a rectangle. So I'll click one corner. I'll move the cursor out. Now it doesn't matter the size or the shape of the rectangle. I could go really tiny, or I could go really large. The larger it gets, the easier it is to find a clipping plane sometimes down the line when you've kind of forgotten clipping planes or if you need to adjust things. So we typically want to go bigger, but if you go smaller, it doesn't actually affect how the clipping plane is created. So I'm just going to go somewhere around right there, click, okay. And then we have the symbol. And this is our clipping plane. So I'll go ahead and select it and move it right away into my first floor clipping plane. We'll go ahead and, oh, I didn't select it. Let's select it, right click, change object layer. Okay. Now I can select it. Let's go into one of our views. Here we go, the front side view. And you'll see that it's right along that surface where we created the rectangle. So from here, all I have to do with the gumball turned on is click on my blue arrow and just move this 4 feet. And there you have it. We have a floor plan. Okay. Just so that we could see, I could select the clipping plane and just click and drag, and it'll essentially create a cut at the location of that clipping plane. Go ahead and undo that. So we're back at 4 feet. Okay. Now turning off the clipping plane layer doesn't actually disable the clipping plane. It just turns the symbol, the clipping plane symbol, off because these symbols can begin to become a bit annoying. So it's nice to be able to turn the symbol off. But if we want to disable the clipping plane, then what we have to do is select the clipping plane and type in disable clipping plane. And there you see it pops up. Disable clipping plane, enter. Okay. And so that'll bring it back to kind of its original state. If we want to enable the clipping plane, then we'll go ahead and select it, and then we'll type in enable clipping plane. And that's going to turn the clipping plane back on. And I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and disable this one because we want to create a second clipping plane. So go ahead and type in clipping plane. I'm going to create this one right up here. Okay. Notice that this clipping plane, when I drew the rectangle, was a bit smaller. Now look at the symbols, right? You could see that the symbol is a little bit smaller than the ground floor one that I created. You'll also notice that this clipping plane actually showed up down here on the ground floor, not on the second floor. So I'm going to move this up, and I'm actually going to eyeball this. I'm going to get relatively close, just like that. I'll zoom in and I'll bring this clicking and dragging right there. It doesn't have to be exact, right? If we're off by a quarter of an inch, that's not a big deal. But now that it's here on the second floor, I'll go ahead and select it, hit the blue arrow, and move this up 4 feet. Okay. And now we have our second floor clipping plane. Let's go ahead and select this. I forgot to put it in the corresponding layer. So now I could turn the symbol off. Okay. And now I'm ready to do the make 2D and follow the same steps as the elevation, although we're going to do something a little bit differently with the floor plan here. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to go into my top floor, into my top view, so I can see the top, right? So I can see the floor plan, because remember, these orthographic drawings cannot be drawn in a perspective, right? This is a perspective. The staircase is creating a perspective view. The fact that I could see the bottom of some of my walls touch the ground is a perspective view. So we need an orthographic view, which removes the perspective, which is a flat two-dimensional drawing. So that's why we come to our views. The problem is that I have my roof on, right? And it's not even that I have my roof, is that the clipping plane does not affect or did not affect my top view. So let's bring that second floor clipping plane back on. The thing with clipping planes is that they are enabled in the view that they were created in, and that's it, right? So when I create a clipping plane in the perspective view, that clipping plane only exists or is only enabled in the perspective view. All of the other views stay exactly the same, okay? So what we would need to do is select the clipping plane, then go into the view that I want to get into, and simply zoom in or zoom out just so that we can activate that view. Once the view is active with the clipping plane already selected, I can go ahead and type in enable clipping plane. And now I've enabled this clipping plane in my top view. Now I could go ahead and do a cross window and just type in make 2D, hit enter. We're going to leave it as view, group, we'll hit OK. And there we have it. Let's go ahead and move this right over here. Okay. And now we have our floor plan. So let's go ahead and come inside here. I'm finding it very, very difficult to see my lines, my thick lines. Um, what I'm going to do, well, first of all, it's actually a lot easier to move everything into one layer. So notice right now, like everything is in multiple layers, because that's where they were cut from. We also have to remember that this is still as a group because that's how we asked Rhino to export it. Um, and so what I'm going to do is select it. Let's ungroup it first. Okay. And what I was going to say is that because everything is in different layers, I don't have to click everything. We'll go line by line and assign every single line to its corresponding layer. Actually a lot easier if I can just select the whole thing and put it in one common layer that, most of the lines will fall into. And in this case, because most of the lines are being cut through, they're going to be our thick lines. So I'll go ahead and right click under thick and change the object layer. Again, that didn't do anything, right? That's still blue, even though it's in the thick lines. So let's go ahead and select this and let's go into the properties box because the display color has to be set to by layer. Okay. So now we come back over here and now you'll see that everything is in the thick layer. It was always in the thick layer, but now it's showing as being part of the thick layer. The problem that I'm realizing now is that this green is super difficult to see. Like it's kind of blinding and I also can't really see anything. So let's go ahead and change the color. Let's go with, oh, dark green seems to work. Let's take, oh yeah, that works way better. Let's hit OK. All right, so we have now ungrouped it and we have everything in the thick layer. Now the next thing is going to be to poche my walls. Actually, before we do that, we have to go around and just clean the drawing if it needs some cleaning. Like for example, that shouldn't be there. We have these lines that I'm going to delete. These lines were part of the materials when we were adding materials for the render. So I can go ahead and delete that. And I think we're good at this point. So that looks good. Okay. So you always need to go through a process of cleaning up the drawing whenever you do make 2D. So drawing is clean, lines are no longer in a group. Now we want to go ahead and poche. So poche refers to hatching or filling in any of the walls that are being cut through, right? The idea is that we're trying to signify like a solid mass, something that is solid versus that we're actually cutting through versus things that are falling along in the background. Now we can always use line weights, like a heavier line weight or a thinner line weight to show that differentiation. But a solid poche, like filling in, is much, much more clear and visually much easier on the eyes to really be able to see what's solid, like what we're cutting through versus what we're not cutting through. Okay. So in order to do that, I'm going to use the hatch command. Actually, before that, we're going to create a layer called poche. So, and I'm going to put it on my lines layer. So I'll just type in no, not like that. Spell it correctly too. Poche. Go ahead and just move this down to the bottom here. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to use the hatch command, hatch, and it's going to ask me to select the curves, boundaries equal to no. What this means that it's asking me to select each individual curve, and I don't want to do that. And it's going to create a hatch not based by boundaries, but by line work. And that's not what I want. I want it to base on the boundaries of these lines. So I'm going to hit select. Okay. And now it's asking me to select the curves. I'm just going to save myself a lot of time and just select the whole thing. So I do a cross window and then I'll hit enter. And then it's asking me click inside regions to keep. So now I'll go ahead and click inside the areas that I want to fill in with a solid color, which will end up being black. So I'm just going to click inside all of these regions here. And I think that's it. So now I'll hit enter. And right here, there are different hatch styles that we could use, but I'm just going to leave it on the solid. For poche, it should almost always be solid. Fill style, solid, um, and leave it as black. And so I'll hit OK. Okay. And there you have it. There is our floor plan with the pochade lines. Now the thing is, let's actually go ahead and select each one and put it in the pochade lines. I'm holding down the shift key to do a multiple selection. And I'm going to right click and change object layer. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn these off just because I don't want to accidentally select them. And I'll go ahead and start adding things to different layers, right? So right now everything is on thick. The first thing that I want to address are these windows. Now, technically these windows I'm cutting through. Actually, I am cutting through them. So we need to actually poche those. I didn't realize that. All right, so let me bring the poche back. We're actually cutting through these window frames. So we actually need to poche through those window frames. So I'm going to turn the layer off again. I'm going to go to hatch, boundary set to yes, which is what we want. Do another cross window, hit spacebar, and this time I'm going to go ahead and click inside each one of these. And you know what? For this, I think I'm going to go ahead and just pause the recording so you don't have to watch me go through the whole thing. All right, so now we've pocheted inside these lines. I also, let me zoom in here just so you can see the door frames. And I also pocheted this little post, which I think I forgot to do the first time around. So what I will do is I'll go ahead and select all of this and then put it in with my poche layer. So that it all fits, or so that I could turn them all on and off together whenever I need to do that. So let's go ahead and grab this last one, put it in the poche layer. Let's turn poche back on. There we go. So that's what the poche should actually look like. Okay. So now with the poche turned on, I can go ahead and assign the rest of the line work to its appropriate layer. So I'm going to select these two, and these should be on the medium layer. Okay. Now, technically, these lines are closer to us, right? So technically, if we're following this logic that the things that as the objects or the line work is that's closer to us should be thicker and the things that are farther should be thinner, technically this should be thicker than this because these lines are actually closer to us than this line. These lines represent the frame. This represents the sill. All right. However, this is a lot of lines that are close together. So if we place these with a thicker line, then that means that these subsequent lines here are going to be thicker. So they're going to be jumbled up together, right? When a floor plan is taken, this is where we see it. These are going to show up as really thick kind of solid lines because they're so close together. So I'm going to purposely make these lines thinner. Okay, change object layer. They'll be a lot thinner, and then I'll make the sills a bit thicker. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do that with all of these lines. I'll do the same thing. I'll go ahead and just pause the recording so that you don't have to sit and watch me do this. Although this can become somewhat therapeutic, but we'll go ahead and pause this. All right, so I went ahead and changed all of the layers along the windows. All right, over here for my railings, I used a medium line. The last thing I'm going to do is come over here and just do kind of a cross window around my stairs. And I'm going to see if we can select all this stuff. Put all of this in my thin layer. Change object layer. Okay. Now it could be that when I create the drawing itself, I could go in and say, you know what, this really should be thicker, these should be thinner, right? We do always have to take a look at the drawing and then make the assessment at that point of which lines need to be um, thicker and thinner in that way, right? I'm actually going to leave my window frames alone. Sorry, my door frames alone, just because I feel like when I draw them, sorry, when we print this, these are going, because this is under the thick layers, I have a feeling that these are going to just kind of pop in as solids. So we'll have to see what that looks like. This way I don't have to go in and click in between every single one and do a poche because that's going to take a lot of time. I'd rather take the risk, hope that because it's so thick and because it's so small and because we're taking the floor plan so far away, that these will show up as a poche. The last thing I'm going to show is my roof. Okay? And the roof should be set to a medium because it's a bit farther back. We could actually even get away with a thin line if we wanted to. But we'll leave it as a medium and then we'll see what that looks like when we print. Okay. But other than that, that's how we go about creating a floor plan. We now have a floor plan that's pocheted with varying line weights that we can go ahead and print. Okay. In the next tutorial, we'll go ahead and cover vertical sections. Right.